Basic Skills Day 6. We're going to do a quick little warm-up review of order of operations. Make sure you're still understanding these ideas. So please try these two problems, pause the video, and then come back and see if you've got it correct. The answer to number 1 should be 3. The answer to the second problem should be -10. Now, if you did not get that correct, remember the first thing you need to do on number 1 is do the parentheses first, what's in the parenthesis, and you have to follow addition and subtraction left to right. So you would get 8 minus 3, which is 5, and then you'd have to add the 1 at the end, which gives you 5 times 6 divided by 10. Now you have to do multiplication and division left to right, so you get 30 divided by 10. And that's what gives you your 3. In the second problem, the first thing you need to do is the exponent. And 3 squared is 9. It's 3 multiplied twice. So now we have 8 minus 2 times 9, which gives us, again, we need to do the multiplication first, so 9 times 2 is 18. So now you get 8 minus 18, which gives you your -10. So, in the basic skills, the homework for today is your fraction worksheet number 2 for day 6. So today we're going to work on adding and subtracting fractions. So, when you add and subtract fractions, first you need to change all the whole numbers or the plain old numbers to fractions. You do that by putting a 1 under it. So if you have the number 3, you change it to 3 over 1. You change mixed numbers to improper fractions. And you need to also find a common denominator. Remember, a mixed number would be something like -2 and 1/3. We need to change that to an improper fraction. And to do that, we have to multiply the denominator by the whole number. So 3 times 2 is 6. Then we add the 1 at the top to get 7/3. The fraction sign just stays positive or negative. We don't factor that in when we're multiplying and adding those integers together. So once we've changed the whole numbers to fractions and improper or mixed to improper and find a common denominator, we're going to add or subtract. We're add and subtract the numerators, and the denominator stays the same. So we always reduce at the end if we can. Now we'll talk about finding common denominators. When we do this, our denominator has to be the same. So when we add or subtract, these numbers have to be the same. In this first example, they are. So we don't need to do any of those other steps. We just need to add or subtract the numerators. So 7 minus 3 is -4. So we get -4/10. You try the next problem and example 2 and see if you can get that answer correct. Your answer should be 15/8, and that can't be reduced. We could change it into a mixed number, but we don't need to. So let's take a look at what happens if we don't have a common denominator, like in example 3 here. Now we don't have the same number. But if this first fraction was in terms of tenths, then we would have a common denominator. So we can easily get this fraction in terms of tenths by simply multiplying by 2 over 2. That really, we're just multiplying by 1, so we multiplied the denominator by 2 to get our 10. We also have to do the same to the numerator, so 2 times 4 would give us 8/10. Now we have that common denominator again. And so now we can go back and we can add. 8 plus 3 is 11, and we get 11/10. Okay, your turn to try example 4. You will need to find a common denominator. Can you think of a number that both 3 and 4 go into? Well, both 3 and 4 go into 12. So I'm going to change both of these fractions into twelfths. I will change the 1/3 into twelfths by multiplying by 4. If I multiply the denominator by 4, I get 12. So I have to multiply the numerator by the same thing. And again, I'm really just multiplying by a value of 1. So this becomes 4/12. And for the second fraction, I would need to multiply both the top and the bottom by 3, which gives me 3/12 for a total of 7/12 when I add them together. Now, none of these fractions needed to be reduced at this point, so we don't need to be concerned about that, but always look to see if you can reduce your fractions. So let's look at these last two examples here. And here's where we need to apply some of those rules that we talked about earlier. We need to first change any whole numbers into fractions by simply putting a 1 under them. Now we don't have a common denominator for this. So what could we change these denominators to? Well, you could simply change the first fraction into sevenths. So if I multiply this by 7, that gives me a denominator of 7. So now I just multiply the numerator by 7 to get 21/7. Sometimes you have to change both fractions, like in the last example, and sometimes only one. So now I can go ahead and subtract. 21 minus 3 would give me 18. And then we keep the same denominator, 18/7. Again, I can't reduce that. There's no number that goes into both 7 and 18 besides 1 that I could reduce by. So let's look at this second example. Here we need to change these mixed numbers into improper. So again, I'm going to multiply the 3 times the 2 and then add the 2, the numerator. So that's going to give me 3 times 2 is 6, plus 2 is 8. I get 8/3. Now I'm going to subtract. Again, I need to change this. 3 times 5 is 15, plus 1 gives me 16/5. Do not have a common denominator here. One of the ways that you can get a common denominator is take your largest denominator and start scaling it up. 5, then the next increment or next multiple would be 10. Well, 3 doesn't go into 10, 3 doesn't go into 5. But if I go 5, 10, 15, 3 does go into 15. So I can change both of these fractions to have a common denominator of 15. So again, what would get me from 3 to 15? Multiplying by 5. Do the same to the top. That gives me 40/15. What would get me from 5 to 15? That's multiplying by 3. So do the same to the top, and that gives me 48. So now I take 40 minus 48. That gives me -8/15. And that is the end of day 6, basic skills, or our second day of fractions.